calculated, and it's our 77th. So not quite there yet. I was hoping we could celebrate the 100th show at Leeds Sharp Festival. That'll be next year, won't it? Something like that. Anyway, I'm Matt. I'm a .NET developer. You'll be seeing a lot of me tonight. Usually we have a big team, and we split our talks up a bit, but it's just me today. So if you're not sick of me by the end of it, I'll buy you a drink in Brewery Tap. And if you are, just see you later. I don't know if you all saw the agenda, but we usually have a little news section to fill you in on the industry .NET stuff. .NET Framework 4.8 was released this month. Anyone excited about that? No?
More excited for Core 3.
Yeah, I'm more excited about that.
No?
More excited for .NET Core 3.
.NET Core 3, yeah, we'll be talking about that a little bit tonight. Let me just get my Wi-Fi up. Wi-Fi! It's the problem when you drink beers downstairs. Settings. Here we go. Feedly. Right, news. Where we go? So .NET 4.8. Anyone use Node? Yeah. So Node 12 is now available. Anyone excited about that? And F Sharp 4.6. We don't do enough F Sharp. I think we need a talk on F Sharp again sometime. And Entity Framework Core 3.0 preview 4. Anyone using Entity Framework? Yeah. And then, GitHub has released a new version of Atom. I didn't know GitHub owns the Atom IDE, but apparently they do. And the new feature is that you can view comments from your code reviews in the IDE. Who uses Atom? One. You like it? Yeah. What? You're you're hardcore, yeah. You don't like VS Code?
Well, I'm not actually a C Sharp.
Well, you don't have to be C Sharp. There's a PHP guy that uses VS Code.
Yeah. It's IntelliJ.
Oh, there you go. There you go. All right. Did I say thank you to our sponsors? Fruition is here, represented. Where are you? Yeah. Our gold sponsor, Conflux and Stackify sends us goodies every November for our Christmas panel show. They're good lads as well. Right. Our first section is called what's it called again? Oh, Kaizen Bits. So we do a section called Kaizen Bits, which is basically anything that makes you a better developer. So it could be, a set of resharper shortcuts. Could be new language features. I think John did that last time, didn't you? But mine is a book recommendation, and it's about the habit loop. So that's the book, The Power of Habit. Anyone read that? Good. So apparently, all our life so far, as it has definite form, is but a mass of habits. It was written a long time ago. So what does that mean? Hang on a minute. Oh wait, can I split the screen? Wait, I need to split the screen. There you go. Windows P? There you go. Where are the nodes? Bear with me. Where do you get the presenter notes?
I always go old school and just print the notes out.
Yeah, I've got that as a backup, but I thought I'd be. Here we go. We're good. Right. So, what are habits? There was scientific research was done, and they had a guy that had epileptic fits or something like that. This is way back in the 40s or something like that, and they found that it was to do with the part of the brain that does the memory. And so they thought if they remove it and open up his brain and remove it, that might improve his epileptic fits. And it did, but as a side effect, he lost all his memory. So he had his short-term memory still, but he couldn't remember like a good 20 years back. He couldn't remember, what he did when he was a kid and all that. But what they found was that he could still form habits and then learn new things, and they found that the basal ganglia in the brain is responsible for forming habits. So how do habits work? Basically, you need a cue, a trigger, that triggers a routine, and then you do something, and then you need a reward at the end of it. So what the brain does basically is convert a sequence of actions into automatic routines, and that's called chunking. And the brain does that basically to save effort. And they found through measuring the brain activity in rats that once those habits are formed, that the processing power basically, the brain activity goes down. So it's an automatic way of the brain doing something without thinking about everything. And the brain needs that, otherwise you'd be thinking about every little thing. Think about driving, for example. When you first learned how to drive, you were thinking about reversing and where the car is and all that, and now you just sit in the car and you do it. Well, basically, that's stored in the basal ganglia. So even if you remove this, the hippocampus, which is your memory, you can still remember things by habit. And so it's like a design pattern basically, or little Azure functions if you want in your brain. Yeah, it's like a little Azure function. So you instead of having a massive server and powering that up every time you need to think about something, you've got habits, and the cue tells the brain to search your search index in your habit search index in your brain, and then triggers a routine, and the reward is telling the brain whether it's worth remembering or not, the habit. And that's how habits are formed. Now, where am I? So of course marketing got hold of this and thought, hang on a minute, we can hook into this and form new habits. So what I didn't know, before I think it was the Second World War, the First World War, in America, there was about 6 million people who didn't brush their teeth. And the army even did an ad because the soldiers had rotten teeth. So a smart guy called Claude C. Hopkins hooked into this habit loop and formed new habits and did a series of ads and found that it worked. So he single-handedly got Americans to brush their teeth on a regular basis. Before that, no one brushed, well, very few people had a routine to brush their teeth. So the cue here, he found, he used the cue as, he said there's a thin film on your teeth that you need to look after. That was the cue. And then the reward was beautiful teeth, basically. And it worked. And it worked ever since in advertising. So, so here we go. That's the cue, the film. The routine is brushing and the reward is white teeth. And it's been used ever since in advertising. So that got me thinking, that sounds very much like red-green refactor. A little bit, like green could be the reward. Red is probably the refactor is the routine, or you could apply that to design patterns. You could have an analogy for that in design patterns. So that's my Kaizen Bits. I recommend reading the book. It's interesting from a developer's point of view because it's basically you could look at it as an API to the brain, and you can reprogram your own brain. Basically, you can form good habits and unprogram bad habits by replacing triggers. You find the triggers. Yeah.
Have you read the chimp paradox?
No.
It's very much like that. I think they say parietal lobe is part of your habit forming as well.
Oh yeah.
So instead of going to your main CPU and saying, "I've worked out this problem today," then previous problems that you worked out in the past with cue and reward,
Yeah.
it goes, I think that was the best way to do something. I'm going to store that in my locker of quick habits that I know are
Yeah.
patterns that work. But unfortunately, depending on whether or not the part of your brain you use to create the habit, you can use your logical processing part and put a logical habit in there. So you get those out and that's how you deal with stuff. But if you put a fear-based emotional habit into your parietal lobe, then those are the ones that you'll get out in times of stress or efficiency. And then when you say you can debug your habits, that's part of the process that psychologists take people through.
Exactly, it's part of.
Because they're leaning on possibly ill-formed habits.
Yeah.
And you can refactor them.
Yeah, that's what you do. Let's say you bite your nails or you're smoking or something like that. You go to a behavioural psychologist, for example. You identify the cues, the triggers whenever you do that, bite your nails. This is one of the examples given in the book. With someone, after days, they stopped biting their nails because they identified the cues. Then they replaced the routine with a positive routine, and as long as you have the reward at the end of it, it works. It's replacing bad habits with.
One of the examples we give in the chimp paradox is that if you work somewhere with really terrible management, and every time they say, "Oh, the boss wants to see you," you go in and he gives you a roasting, and anytime the boss wants to see you, even if it's good, you're immediately going to think because you've got this kind of predetermined behaviour. So you move to a company where the manager is great, and you hear the boss wants to hear you. You're like this.
Yeah.
But you have to become aware that maybe there's a problem that you need to refactor.
Yeah, so I use that on a daily basis. I use something called the Pomodoro technique, which is basically you set yourself a timer for 25 minutes and you focus on one thing only and you know it's only 25 minutes, and then every time your brain wants to procrastinate, you think, well, I've only got 15 minutes left. Let's put that to one side, and it works because the reward is I've got it on my phone that you have the stats, and at the end of the day, if I have 12 pomodoros, I know I've had a productive. It's a measure of productivity basically, and I've had a productive day. Whereas if I've only got 2 pomodoros on there, I know I've been browsing Amazon for half a day. Right. Okay. So that's the Kaizen Bits part. The next part is called design pattern recognition, and what we do. What we do in this section is we talk about design pattern, because you can't talk about design patterns enough. I got my speaker notes. There you go. Until I'm not a present. Don't do this with everything. There we go. All right. So the design pattern we're going to talk. Well, I always do this before the actual design pattern, just to bring everyone up to speed what design patterns are. So I'll try and do it in 60 seconds. I'll never make it. So what are design patterns? Templates for solving common problems. This hooks into the habit loop quite nicely, actually. They're not algorithms, but rather starting points of how to do things, and they define best practices, basically, of little parts of how to solve coding problems, and they're tried and tested. So it's good to memorize them, and I don't think many of us, because there's hundreds of them, really, review them enough. So that's what this section is all about. This guy basically was the founder of Design Patterns and Architect. So in 1987, Kent Beck and Ward Cunningham came up with design patterns, and in 1994, the Bible of Design Patterns came out, called the Gang of Four. So basically, then they are there to so you don't reinvent the wheel all the time, which as developers, I think we're guilty of doing, even if we've done it for many years, because we think our way is the best way, but that's not a professional way to do it, because other people have to look at the code, and if they recognize design patterns, then it's easier to maintain and easier to refactor. And we talk the same language, and more importantly, we avoid technical debt. How are we doing with 60 seconds? So here's the categories of design patterns: creational design patterns, structural design patterns. We'll be talking about an architectural design pattern, which is not on the list today, but it ties in nicely with the main talk, with AR and A-frame in particular. Yeah, I should just leave this, shouldn't I? Adapter patterns, structural design patterns, behavior, visitor design pattern, template. Yeah, I need to refine this. But these are all, I mean, familiar design patterns. Model view presenter pattern is the pattern of modern web design, and the service layer pattern, and value objects and entities are used. I mean, a lot of them are also built into the programming language. Right, so today we're going to talk about the entity component system pattern. Like I said, it's an architectural pattern. It's an alternative to object-oriented design, actually, and it's mostly used in game development. It follows the composition of over inheritance principle, which is similar to composition as a general design pattern, but composition focuses on the has a polymorphism, while the entity component system focuses on applying behavior to entities. So what is the entity component system? So the objects are the entities, and entities are made up of components. So entities are basically just a bag of components, a collection of components, and they usually have an ID, but there's no logic in the components, and the components define behavior. They're pure data. There's no logic in components, and that makes it possible to change behavior even at runtime with entities. And the system is a collection of entities that contains the logic. For example, drawing is a drawing function is a system, for example, or collision detection in game would be a system. And the system is basically a service layer that centralizes persistent state and controls the flow of data through components. So here we've got an example. So you've got a tree. These are the entities basically, and the tree has a position component, but the position component is also part of the enemy. Part of the player. So you can build up a component. You can build up an entity with by adding components or behavior to an entity. So what are the benefits of this pattern? There's no inheritance hierarchies, which makes it inheritance basically makes it harder to refactor. You end up with deep inheritance trees, which comes with baggage that you don't necessarily want. They're easier to maintain and easier to extend, and the data flows via components. So a position can be updated in a component, and the data flows and reused by multiple entities. So it's very much a data-oriented design rather than an object-oriented design, which is better for memory. So it's better to arrange data in memory to maximize data locality. And then the code uses large blocks of data all at once, rather than a single object, like in object-oriented design. So as you would expect, the Unity game engine and the Unreal game engine are very much built on this architectural pattern. And more relevant to our talk, the A-frame, which I'll be talking about later, JavaScript library, also uses this pattern. So you can see this is an HTML element from A-frame, but if you wanted to add a component, for example, sing component to this element, you just do it in JavaScript and register the component, and then tell it what to do, and then you can add, and then you can use that attribute in the HTML to sing hello, and that will do it. And then at runtime, you can change that attribute, and that update function will then fire off within the component. So the ABox element is the entity, and the component that we've just added is the sing. Is that clear? Right, so summary. It's an alternative to the object-oriented design. It makes code more maintainable, and it's better for performance, basically. And it's not just used, I mean, it comes from game development, but it's being used more and more in other areas of programming. Right. That's our intro section. So we'll take a short break now and set up for the main talk. And we'll have another beer and some pizza. And we'll go on to the main talk. Hey? Really? go to that URL. and I can see them there. There you go. All right. Okay. Main talk. Right. We're going to be talking about AR, augmented reality in e-commerce specifically. So a little bit more about myself. You're not sick of me already. I'm a .NET developer. I started coding when my dad got me a VIC-20, and that's how old I am. I started with classic ASP, and then .NET came out, so I've been doing this for 20 years. I worked for a sports retailer and became head of e-commerce before starting my own business, Tronik, 10 years ago, and we are a small e-commerce consultancy. So decided early on. So when you first start your business, you know, every mate of yours says, "Oh yeah, I've got a mate who wants a website," and you do that for a while, and then you realise, actually, I just want to do one thing. I'm not going to do your brochure site. I'm going to specialise on e-commerce because that's what I know best. Always classed myself as a jack of all trade. I did a bit of UX design. Started off as a multimedia designer in the late 90s, doing CD-ROMs. But I know digital marketing well enough, and I know front end, so that makes me a consultant. It's a good way of doing things, and I think this is what this talk is about as well. Is you take a large industry, a large sector, say web development, for example, and you take a small slice out of it, e-commerce, and you focus on that, and everything sort of gets a better context. So you're doing UX for e-commerce, for conversions, for sales, not for anything else. So enough about me. So a bit of an overview of the talk. We'll talk about, get the basics down, what augmented reality is. I'm sure most of us know, but we'll talk about the technical part of it a little bit, and then look at why augmented reality is exciting in the e-commerce sector, and we'll look at native apps, because augmented reality is nothing new. It's been around for a while, and there's some really good apps out there. And we'll compare the native apps to web apps, which is what we're going to be focusing on today. And then we'll just look at all the technologies that are coming together, and why it's a much better proposition than native apps, especially for augmented reality. So we were talking about progressive web apps a bit. I'll bring in a bit of .NET, because we're drifting off a little bit. It's strictly speaking not .NET. I know we're a .NET user group, but we're broadening the spectrum a little bit. But there's .NET Core 3 in there, and Razor components and all that stuff, so that's ticked off. And WebRTC. And so the main idea I want to get across from this talk is that there's a fundamental change happening, or how we access information, how we access data, going from 2D basically, from search results, to 3D, augmented reality, and data with in context to the real world. And yeah, that's that. So what is augmented reality? So from a technical point of view, it's a digital layer on top of the physical world. So usually when you think about it, it's 3D objects imposed onto the real world but it could be other real objects as well. It doesn't have to be a 3D object. So, you know, distant meetings is classed as augmented reality, or you could have stuff that you can't usually see, like electromagnetic waves, for example. You could have that superimposed onto the real world. It could be auditory, it could be touch, or it could even be smell. There was a really good app, I couldn't find it anymore, they must have removed it from the App Store, called Night Terror. Has anyone ever seen that? My wife refused to put the headphones on. Basically, you can only play it at night in your house, and you have to get on the phone. It's an iPhone app, and you have to put your headphones on, and then you walk through your house with your lights off, and you know you hear like monsters coming, and you know, like basically horror. It's a horror film basically in your own house. It was amazing. I don't know why they removed it. It was probably too scary. yeah, but it was really, really good, really scary.
You know things said before about forming fear habits.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it does.
Yeah, really.
It's totally meant to rattle that.
No. Yeah, you're right. So.
Good way to cut down on midnight snacks, though.
Have you ever seen a horror movie that you wish that you could turn that time and not horror?
I know you probably play that once and never ever. You'd probably move house or something like that. So, augmented reality can be constructive or destructive, which means you either add something to the real world or you hide something. And, you know, we've all seen the Snapchat filters and Facebook messages where you put stuff on, you look like Santa Claus or whatever. The difference between virtual reality and augmented reality is that VR obviously replaces the real world, and VR usually needs some sort of a headset for it, which is a barrier. You know, let's face it. I love. Remember when 3D came out? You know, what was it? Avatar came out, and I love 3D. I even got myself a 3D projector, but it was always and they sold these 3D cameras as well. Where you can take 3D pictures. They're amazing. They're absolutely stereoscopic photos, but you can't view them. You can't print them on paper, and they were always a bit of a fad, really. I mean, 3D is sort of phased out now, hasn't it? Really. I mean, you get the old good one. I mean, The Hobbit, for example, is amazing to watch in 3D. But augmented reality alters the perception of the real world. That's the difference. Also known as mixed reality, and it needs to be immersive. Otherwise, you spoil the illusion. It needs to be perceived as part of the natural environment. And the physical world provides the context. So finding and consuming data becomes more integrated. You know, it's like you can almost imagine in 10 years' time we'll look back on the first 20 years of 2000 or the first 20 years of the internet, and laugh about, say, you know, you remember when we had to troll through Google search results and text and all that, because we won't be doing that anymore, possibly, you know. It will all be in context. We won't have to Google it. We'll just have to look somewhere and it will come up. So the first AR systems, as you would expect, were the first commercial AR systems were in the 1990s, as you would expect from the military. It's a good use case. The game industry is always at the forefront of new technologies. In fact, they're all over the web AR stuff as well, Unity and Unreal. And education is also a good use case for augmented reality, as we'll see later on. And I'm sure porn had its say as well, because porn is always at the forefront of new technologies as well. Where there's money to be made, porn's there. I couldn't find any augmented porn. Don't worry. So one of the key aspects for augmented reality from a technical point of view is tracking the real world. So it's not just about rendering 3D objects. It's to get that immersiveness, you need to be able to place that object somewhere, and it needs to look like it stays there, basically. So tracking is really important. There's two techniques for tracking. The easy way is with a marker, which we'll see later on. This is a marker. Makes it easier. Obviously, you don't have to scan your environment when you have a marker. You just put it there. It's useful for sort of like touristy AR use cases, for example, where you've got signs. We were just talking about that early on. You know, let's say you're in Japan and you want to know where something is. You hold up your phone and there's signs in English everywhere. It's a good use case, and you could use markers for that. There is hardware for augmented reality. Google Glass, we were talking about just now. Sadly not. Well, it had privacy issues, didn't it? It sounded like a good idea. So that came out in 2013. Then the HoloLens, currently in its second version, came out in 2016. We had a talk from someone from Microsoft last year about that. It was amazing. And that sort of came from the whole Kinect technology. And then there's the Magic Leap 1. Anyone heard of Magic Leap? So this is an amazing company. They've had $2.5 billion invested by Google and by Samsung. They're estimated to be worth, I don't know, $6 billion. And they haven't sold a single product yet. Well, I think they've just brought out the Magic Leap 1, which, I think last year or something like that. But it's a measure of how excited companies are about augmented reality. And so from my point of view, from an e-commerce point of view, it has a much better use case than VR. Yeah, I'm sorry to say, but I think, you know, with the Oculus Rift and all that, I still think it's a bit of a fad, to be honest. But augmented reality has the potential to become an everyday tool. Apple's bringing out AR glasses end of this year. They're supposed to come out. That's them there. They look better than Google glasses, or you would expect them to be designed better coming from Apple. But obviously, that's also a piece of hardware for AR, and that's what we're going to focus on tonight mainly. Because everyone has this. There's 100 million people in the world with smartphones already. So that's something you don't have to go out and buy. So we talk about different realities. You only have to go on the bus stop or outside or just walk through town and bump into a few people who are just staring at their phone. We're already in a different reality. This is a window into a different reality, and let's face it, we'll probably spend 50% in this reality already. So the proposition is that instead of text, this becomes a more interactive way of dealing with data. So it moves from 2D to 3D, like I said. And it's rumored, people say that in 5 or 10 years we might have a sort of fully or semi-transparent device rather than maybe not glasses, but something, you know, that just looks like a piece of, you know, stuff that you can look through that replaces the phone. And maybe,
When you drop it.
pardon?
It's gonna look great when you drop it.
Well, yeah, it won't break, that's for sure, won't it? Just a piece of film. But maybe augmented reality will lift all our heads again, and maybe we'll start looking up again and stop bumping into things. So back to e-commerce. Why AR in e-commerce? So when Amazon first started out, one of the main success stories of Amazon was machine learning and product recommendations. It's the foundation of what Amazon is all about. And similar, augmented reality has the same potential to do that. Now, the high street shopping has this sort of unique experience where, you know, I get that from my wife a lot. You know, I don't want to buy anything online. There's certain things you don't want to buy online. You want to try it on, don't you? And so AR could be a bridge between that, because according to Mike Ashley, the high street is already dead. It's dying. I mean, you have to walk through Leeds. The shops are closing down left, right, and centre. So it's an opportunity not to replace the high street, but perhaps bring in more footfall. You know, if you, for example, I've got a demo app. You think about a jeweler, for example, who's selling engagement rings. If you could sit, let's say you get married, or you're about to propose, and you can sit on your sofa and hold your phone up and try on engagement rings. You might not buy it straight away, but you've got a good idea of what you want, and then you go into the shop. So it could actually help bring more footfall into the high street rather than killing it off. But from an e-commerce point of view, it's proven to reduce return rates. It certainly increases conversion rates or add to basket rates. And from our point of view, from a developer's point of view, or from a tech business point of view, it presents an opportunity for new services. You know, has anyone heard of a Magic Zoom? The plugin Magic Zoom. You see it on almost every website. You're on the product page, and you can click to zoom the product. I mean, it's the bread and butter of e-commerce. And these guys, Magic Zoom, I'm sure there's other companies that do the same thing, but Magic Zoom's been around for ages, and they sell their license for about 39 quid or something like that. If you could have a plugin for AR that does the same thing in the browser, you know, you've got a website already, just add this plugin. That's an opportunity. If you're selling a license, let's say for $20 or something like that, obviously you need the 3D services to back it up, to convert products into 3D models, which will be the real money spinner. But if, let's say, Berries has this on their website, and word gets around that they've increased the footfall or they've increased sales, then you can bet that every other jeweler in Leeds will want the same thing on their website. So that's the opportunity from a technology company's point of view. And so the new buzzword, if you will, is immersive commerce, and more generally immersive web. That's the term that's been thrown around by Google and the likes, and more focused on e-commerce. It's immersive commerce. So it's a new industry sector, and it's worth checking out the technology behind it from a developer's point of view. because if anything, it's exciting to work in that area. So these are the predictions for 2025, which is only 5 years away, or 5.5. It's crazy, isn't it? 2025. So it's not just the video game industry. We'll go all the way down here. The predicted value of the industry is 2.6 billion for AR in retail. So that's something certainly to look at from a company's point of view. So like I said, AR is nothing new. Let's have a look what's already on the market, because there's great stuff on there. So I'm going to switch to my phone. Hopefully this will work. Can I go now? I have to confuse with the slides. There we go. Yeah. All right. Let's have a look at some AR native apps. Got it. Right, first of all, IKEA. Makes sense for them to have an AR app. Not sure if you've seen this already, but let's add a boring chair. Try it in your place. Run this. There you go.
Can I sit on it?
Yeah, go and sit on it. There you go. So this is the kind of thing that's available already for native apps. It's all right. You see what I mean? You put it down. The shadow is quite nice. It stays in one place. You know, I can walk around, look at it. But you know, the 3D model is quite poor, don't you think? I mean, it's like it spoils the immersiveness of the experience. Right, let's look at some educational stuff. Froggypedia. Put this there. There. Right. So you can walk around. You can strip the frog back. Ah! Look at its heart, it's even moving. It's quite cool, isn't it? It's quite immersive. The surface is not the best, I guess, for scanning, but it's you can zoom right in there. Well, that's not bad. Done a good job. Similarly, we have a whole guy here if we want to check out the heart. Scan floor. Let's put in here. Add audio on this as well. So you can imagine this maybe in a. Can you see that? I can feel my phone is vibrating with the heartbeat as well, which is quite cool. You can imagine this in lecture theatres or something like that. I think we can turn this around here, so it's full screen. And walk around, take a closer look. It's cool. dance reality. You can, so Unity, you'll see Unity of quite a few. Yeah. Find a place to dance. Except for right, hang on. Protecting for not quite working. Yeah?
It wants to walk in the disco
See, the surface detection is not as good as the others. Oh, here we go. So the idea, you get the idea. You've got a virtual dance partner, and it teaches you the steps to dance. The structure's too close. Ah, there you go. That's pretty cool. Alright, okay. So, alright, that's that. You like this? Any volunteers for the makeup app? Any women? Any guys? No? Oh,
Go on then.
Eh?
Go on then.
Come on then. Right.
Do you want to not stand there?
Ah, sit down. Closer.
So, you tap one of the faces there.
It's got exquisite.
Yay! It's a bit too red, maybe something a bit more natural, maybe.
Go on, give us a pucker.
That's pretty cool. Well, if you're a company selling makeup, it's not bad. Right, we'll get into the e-commerce stuff now. I've put something in my basket already. So you can see up there, preview in your home. This is what I'm talking about. This is a native app, but they've recently also released a web app with the same functionality. So you tap that icon there, and put it on there. No. There you go. It's not quite to take to the surface there, but you get the idea. You can take a picture. So if this was your home and you were thinking about buying stuff, they're quite useful, you know. All right, I'm going to do one more. That was quite fun, actually. There you go. I think I can tap him as well. Whoa! Good job no one sat there, eh? Anyway, you get the idea. So that's what's available on native apps today. I'm going to stop casting this. Yeah. So, I mean, Pokemon, oh man, you still get Pokemon, guys. One of my mates is crazy about Pokemon. That was like almost 6 years ago or something like that came out, didn't it? Still people, Google Maps have got, you can't get that yet, but they're also introducing an AR mode, which I thought was quite useful to hold your phone up and get extra information. And that's what I mean with data in context to the real world. Why have I got the different speaker notes here? Hang on a minute. So the technology that makes that possible in native apps is on iOS is called ARKit. That's Apple's augmented reality platform. It's in its third major release, even though it's called ARKit 2. I don't quite understand that, but it's you obviously need Xcode and something called SceneKit to do the 3D stuff. It's got a persistent and multi-user experience, which means you can share AR. So you and your mate, or you and a group of people could look at the same virtual object in the same place, which is quite cool. You know, you could leave a piece of art, for example, somewhere, and people could come up and look at it on there. It's got 3D object recognition, so you can place AR objects into the real world without a marker. That's the main selling point. I think. I think markers are sort of like a polyfill for technology that's not quite there yet. We want markerless AR, because if you have to have these guys all over the place, then it sort of spoils the illusion a little bit. It's got face tracking, which is cool. It's how you get the makeup stuff. It can detect you sticking your tongue out and all sorts of things. It's got scene reflection, which is really cool. It helps the immersiveness. So you have real world objects reflected on your 3D objects. That's really cool. And they work together with Pixar to come up with a new file format, which is USDZ, and that's specifically it's for packaging up 3D scenes for AR, specifically for mobile. So it's optimized. It's sort of like Photoshop files are good for Photoshop for doing whatever you do, but then you save it as a JPEG for the web. It's the same sort of thing. You save you use your 3D modeling software, but then you convert it to USDZ files for augmented reality. And they've also brought out AR Quick Look, which works on web pages. We'll touch on that a bit later, but AR Quick Look is not web AR. It's still black box. You can, even though you can embed it, you basically embed it on a web page the same as you do an image, and if you're on an iOS device, iOS 12 or above, you get that little sort of 3D box in there, and you tap it, but then everything else is black box. So from a developer's point of view, you have limited control over what's going on. But then again, you have the surface detection and everything built in. So if you want something up and running really quick, we'll touch on that towards the end. Shopify have made use of that. Then that's an interesting technology to look at. And of course, Google have got their own technology called AR Core, which is basically the same as ARKit for Android. Interestingly, it works on a lot more devices. Android, Unity for Android, Unity for iOS, and in the Unreal game engine. You use the scene form, which is the same as the scene kit, I think, as the 3D framework. It's easy to use, and there's no need for OpenGL with this. With the motion tracking, the phone understands its position relative to the world, which is a key part for the immersiveness. it understands the environment, so it can detect the size and location of surfaces, and it also detects the lighting conditions. So if you've got low light, it knows that it's low light. And as you've seen with the native apps, with most of them, you sort of have to scan the area, and that's what it does. It builds up a 3D view of your environment, which is how it places the 3D objects. So back to the main idea of the talk. The internet was a fad in 1995. I don't know if you've seen, there's a clip of Bill Gates on the David Letterman show from 1995, and he talks about the internet. It's really dated, but you know, people are talking about it as if it's like some sort of technical fad. Fast forward 20 years, and it's all around us. And similarly, a good quote from Henry Ford, you've probably heard this one already. He said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, which is to say that we don't know yet what we can do with this technology and how it's going to impact our world. Now, native versus web apps. That's what we're going to move on to next. So, what's the difference between native apps and web apps? In recent years, the cost per installation has gone up by 40% for native apps. On Android, that's gone from $1.80 to $2.50. On iOS, it's gone up to $4. The average person installs 0 apps on their phone. That's a problem, especially in e-commerce. If you're selling stuff, if I want to buy something, do I want to install your app? Not really, no. Unless you're a recognized brand, and I shop there a lot. I'd say even with Amazon, I prefer their website. Really, I don't use their app. The discoverability is a big factor. There's over 2 million apps on the App Store, so you're competing with a lot of apps, and then people probably uninstall it. 85% of time is spent in the top 5 apps. So you've got, unless you're Facebook or any other of the other top 5 apps, you've got 15% to compete with a user's time. So that's not a lot. Retention is a big problem. 70% of apps are deleted after 30 days, and 38% are deleted after the first hour. The development cost is huge. You have to develop an iOS app and an Android app. Yes, there's platforms now where you can just, blast it out, develop once and blast it onto iOS, but the development cost is still higher than a website, when a web app. And the app stores are a walled garden. There's long approval times. I mean, it takes up to 3 weeks to get your app approved. If you're trying to push something out, 3 weeks is not acceptable. But one of the advantages native apps always had over web apps are that they're fast, and they've got access to the devices, the phone devices, the camera and the microphone. But for how much longer? This is my point I'm going to try and get across. Web apps are catching up. The technology is there. And I would argue that native apps, except for a limited sector, are dead. So the technology gap is closing for web apps. The browser's getting a lot of love. I mean, it's a great time to be a web developer, a .NET web developer, especially. There's new job opportunities. You know, your skills are being transferred from being possibly a back-end developer to the browser, and you've already got the skills. So let's look at these technologies that make AR a reality today. The first one is progressive web apps, which we'll be looking at. We'll be looking at all of them in detail. We'll just quickly go through them. So PWAs are more of a methodology. They're a bundle of best practices for modern websites. They're multi-platform. They allow websites to be treated as apps, so you can have your place on someone's home screen. You can push out live updates without waiting for Apple to approve them. But more on that later. There's WebRTC, which stands for real-time communication. From an AR point of view, that means we have access to the camera. We have access to the mic. It's a well-established standard. I mean, WebRTC is nothing new. It's been around for a while. It works on all mobile phones, all smartphones, and it's a standardized way for devs to use frameworks like 3JS and ARJS, which I'll be touching on later. So that in itself enables real-time AI experiences. There's web workers, which allows you to run on multiple threads. So you can run code on multiple CPU cores. Smartphones have on average 4 cores in them, so it would be nice to run your code on each one of those cores. That's been around for ages as well, although shared memory and atomics are a recent addition, which makes a good case for AR as well. Then there's WebAssembly, which is a low-level programming language, a bit like assembly, it allows you to run non-JavaScript code in the browser, which is, this is the thing that we're getting excited about. We can now run .NET code in the browser. It's what I was saying about transferring skills. How much we all hate front-end development. Now we can do everything. Oh, we don't, of course, but we can do everything in .NET, which means we can reuse native code as well. We can have an entity in C# on the back end and in the front end, which is more efficient. And Unity and Unreal are collaborating with browser makers on this, especially because they are very, very excited about WebAssembly. Then we have WebGL, which allows us to draw the 3D models on a web page. More on that later. And then there is something called WebXR, which started off as WebVR, and then got renamed. It was around about the time when Oculus Rift the DK1 was out. WebVR got proposed, but then augmented reality was added on, so they renamed it WebXR as an umbrella term for WebVR and Web AR and anything else that comes along. One for all. So You don't have to develop for iOS and Android anymore, or Windows Mobile. Tara mentioned that. So you've got low development cost, and you've got instant updates as well. As we all know, websites are update. You don't have to wait for approvals. You've got the benefit of being indexable by search engines, so you have SEO benefits, and a lot of companies have already jumped. I mean, FT.com made the decision ages ago to go web app instead of native app, mainly because they didn't want Apple to get a huge chunk of their subscription revenue. But you know, AliExpress, Starbucks is another one that's a progressive web app now, and it's a much better fit for e-commerce than a native app. I've been doing e-commerce for 20 years, and there was never a high demand for native apps. E-commerce is quite a conservative industry when it comes to designing web. It's about making money. It's not about making it look pretty or having the latest plugins on it. It's if you compare e-commerce design to I don't know, brochure sites or other sites, it's quite conservative. It's boring, some would say, but it's all about making money. And so native apps were never a good fit. So, progressive web apps. Let's talk about this for a little bit. So, for a web app to be deemed a progressive, a PWA, it needs to be progressive. What does that mean? It means it's available to every user and on any browser, on any device. It's responsive, so it works on all screen sizes, tablets, desktop, phones. It's connectivity independent. This is where service workers come in. Service workers are a special case of web workers. You can run script in a new thread, and that enables offline mode. So that's another characteristic of a PWA. You can load things from cache or from a server, and you use the service worker to intercept network requests. It's reliable, it's fast, it's lightning fast, even over slow connections. That's what a PWA, even if you're not doing AR, and even if you're not using all the features that PWA offer, forget offline mode. If you just add a manifest and you use the service workers to speed up your website, and you go secure, because PWA needs to be only over HTTPS, which, let's face it, most websites are these days. But like I said, it's a bundle of best practices. So a PWA is always over HTTPS. If you have these three things, a manifest, service workers, and HTTPS, it's proven to give you an uplift on your website. So even if you're not doing AR and you're thinking about redesigning your website, if you're selling stuff online, go PWA. It's got a native app-like feel to it. It's just in the browser. Like I said, you can add it to your home screen. It's discoverable. You can send push notifications. That's a great one to re-engage customers. It's installable. Like I said, you can add it to your home screen, but you don't need to download anything. You just add it to your home screen. There's no app stores. There's no app store process. it's frictionless. And back to the quote I said early on, the internet only really took off when it became frictionless, and that's and PWA is a move in that direction. And crucially, you've got access to the device's hardware. Now, can you name all the hardware that you've got access to on there? Hands up. The obvious one is camera. Anything else? GPS. There's loads. Yep. Anything else? Microphone. Proximity sensor, magnetometer, ambient light sensor, touchscreen sensors, fingerprint sensors, pedometer, barcode, QR code sensor, barometer, heart rate sensors, thermometer, and if you've got a Galaxy S4, you've even got a humidity sensor. That's a lot to play with from a web page, effectively. I mean, that opens up a whole new world. So, back to the methodology, like I said, it's a new level of quality of websites. That's what PWA stands for. It's how websites should work. It's fast, smooth. The UI feels like native, and it's almost like a natural progression from mobile first to almost mobile only, because the desktop is becoming less and less relevant. So everyone, if you look at your Google Analytics stats, mobile traffic is going up and desktop is going down. The ironic thing is that Steve Jobs announced this in 2007, 12 years ago. He said, he talked about progressive web apps. But Google's Chrome team obviously helped evolve the idea. So here's another stat. Pinterest did some analytics, and they found that they had a 60% uplift in core engagement and a 44% increase in user-generated ad spend. Well, that's a strong use case. Never mind augmented reality. PWA is increases conversion, it increases user engagement, it increases your SEO rankings because your site's faster, so that's a ranking factor. And like I said, if you only use secure site and service workers for the speed, then you're winning. If you're interested, there's a website dedicated to PWA stats called pwastats.com. That's something to show your boss if he wants convincing why you should be developing a PWA. It's a good site to look at. Right. So, first code demo. Thought I'd bring a bit of .NET in, and .NET. Yeah. You can. I was going to record this like professionals do, but I didn't manage to. So let's do this live. There we go. Right. Just to show you how easy it is to create a PWA with ASP.NET .NET new MVC. Boom, you've got a .NET MVC site. Code brings up your site. Then you type in .NET add package. Am I typing? Web Essentials ASP.NET core.pwa. Everyone see that? It's a bit small. That adds the PWA part to it. Then check out the startup, it's already in here. Configure services. Before add MVC, add this guy. That's a little bug. It was working before, and then I installed .NET Core 3 preview, and it stopped working. So you need to add that. And then all you do is add services add progressive web app. Now what that does is two things. It registers the service worker. So you've got a service worker running with your website, and it registers the manifest. So if I F5 this now, I'll get an error.
So the manifest is the list of assets the web page loads when you first hit it.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And it lists the icons that you need to add it to the home screen.
Is that so you can run it offline, or is it just for performance?
Bit of both.
I don't know. Let's add this. Manifest. So this is what the manifest looks like. You have to give it a name, short name, descriptions. Then currently 192 and 512 are compulsory. So if you don't have those, it'll throw an error. And then you just need a start URL. And that somewhere. Hey, there you go. So you look at, in DevTools, you look at applications, so you've got the manifest. It's already telling you that the icons are missing. So let's fix that real quick. So I've just copied some icons into the images folder. Oh, you can see that then. You can see it's not complaining anymore. It's got my icons here. And then more crucially, you've got service worker up and running. So now you can run JavaScript not on the main UI thread. And then you can intercept network requests to serve it from cache or from the network. Yeah? Questions? There we go. Right. Next thing we're going to talk about is web real-time communication. It's an HTML5 specification. It was announced in 2011, so it's been around for a while. It's open source. It works in all modern browsers, and from an AR perspective, it allows the browser to communicate with the devices, camera and microphone. And crucially, you don't need any plugins. It's a JavaScript API. So what you do in JavaScript is just get user media, and then AR libraries make use of this, like 3JS and ARJS, to impose 3D objects onto the camera view on your phone. Web workers is another technology that's crucial for augmented reality. Like I said before, you can run scripts on multiple cores, and the new addition is shared memory, which is interesting because now you can have scripts running on different threads accessing the same memory, so you don't have to pass the data around anymore, which makes it more efficient. It's important for AR because of the 3D processing, obviously, and the tracking. So you don't want to run all that stuff on your main thread, on your UI thread. Otherwise, you'll violate one of the characteristics of a progressive web app, which needs to be fast and smooth. You can't have any what's it called when you have that flicker of unstyled website, you know what I mean?
Jank.
That's right. WebAssembly. This is a relatively brand new technology. WASM for short. I prefer WebAssembly, to be honest. It's a precursor of ASM.js. It was announced in 2015. So not too long ago, and the minimum viable product was released in 2017. It impacts the future of web development. Like I said before, it allows, from a .NET developer's point of view, it allows the transfer of skills. So it's a great time for the .NET developers. and basically it's code that runs lightning fast, almost as fast as native code. It's pre-compiled. The download is small, and WebAR needs fast. That's why it's another part of why WebAR is becoming a reality. You can compile .NET code down. Basically, all .NET code that's .NET standard will run in WebAssembly, which is great, isn't it? It's amazing. Some of you might have seen Steve Sanderson demo at NDC 2017. The prototype, the proof of concept. He went on to turn it into something called Blazor, which I'm told have renamed again. The good news is it ships with ASP.NET Core 3, which is in preview right now. And it just allows you to build web apps in .NET without JavaScript, if you wish. You can code all your website in .NET now. You can run this on the server using SignalR, or you can run it client side using Blazor. You can see that there. Razor components can run on the client, and then they're just transferred via SignalR. Or Blazor is a client-side hosting model for Razor components. That's what it's described as. Yeah. So let's have a look at that. So we'll fire up a brand new Visual Studio 2019 project. You'll just create an ASP.NET Core web application. It's and now you need to download the .NET Core 3 preview and install it, otherwise you won't see it here in the window. You select that and you get different options, and one of them is Razor components. So go ahead and create that. And then you have a sample website with Razor components. Okay. Again, this comes back to the entity component architecture pattern. Everything's a component now. You know, even your homepage is a component. So it could be as simple as that, or what we're interested in is now you have on-click, you're calling that function, but it's not JavaScript, it's C#, and it all runs in the browser. That's pretty cool, I think. So F5 that. You've got the counter like we saw before, and you click and it increases it. You've probably seen this in if you follow the NDC. Right. Right, so the next set is WebGL. Obviously, a big one. WebGL allows you to draw 3D objects, interactive 3D objects on a web page. So in 2007, Canvas 3D was introduced by Mozilla, and that allowed rendering of interactive 3D graphics. In 2009, WebGL working group was started, and in 2011, WebGL 1 came out, which was based on OpenGL ES2. And 2017, WebGL 2 came out, which is based on OpenGL ES3. It's an API for rendering 3D content in the canvas, which is what the AR frameworks, the web AR frameworks use. It has no plugins, and you access it via the DOM. The control code is run in JavaScript, but the shader code is run on the GPU. But it's tedious to write WebGL stuff. It's hard. It's low level. So enter. Oh, well, I'll show you some code here. So that's WebGL, basically.
Zoom in, please.
Zoom in.
Controls what usually does it.
Thanks.
Yeah, so as you can see, this does nothing apart from render a square or a box, and it's a lot of code. Not something you want to be writing if you can avoid it. Enter 3.js, which is a high-level abstraction of WebGL. It's built on top of WebGL. It makes WebGL a lot easier, and it's lightweight. But for AR purposes, it's still not right because you've got the user input, you've got physics, and you've got sensor interaction, which you don't get with 3GS. I'll just show you some 3GS code. There, it looks a lot more. It looks a lot less. You just create a scene, you create a camera, and you create a renderer, and boom, you're off. You add a box. Show this in there. There. A lot easier. That's in a canvas on a web page. Whereas the WebGL a lot of code for that. So I'll take 3GS over WebGL, thank you very much. There's too many windows open now, isn't there? All right. So we're talking about AR in the web, and A-Frame is built on top of 3GS. This is where the entity component framework comes in. It was built by Mozilla in 2015 for VR. It's open source. You don't need any knowledge of WebGL. and it's declarative. It's extensible, composable. It's basically a composable structure for to 3JS. So you can write 3JS in an ECS manner, in an entity component system manner. So yeah. So you can have reusable components, like we saw in the previous talk about entity component systems, and it makes AR development a hell of a lot easier. We look at A-frame. Even shorter. No JS. Basically, do you need me to zoom in again? There we go. Yeah, so you create a scene, you say I want a box, I want a sphere, a cylinder, you add a plane on that and add a bit of sky to it, and you're off. Let's have a look at that. Now you've got this, but check it out. You can actually look around as well. So now we're getting closer to AR.
So it was just one library and a couple of declarative statements.
Correct. Yeah. And it uses 3JS in the background. But it brings that component, that entity component system in. Yeah.
Just to counter a little bit down, can you now kind of like adapt the components of those objects to make them do things?
Correct. Yeah. Like I showed you before, you just do add register component, and then you add your functions or whatever. Just how you, I suppose, bring in a bit of interactiveness as well. Right, back to the presentation. Right. So on top of A-frame, we've got like a burger of libraries. Sits ar.js, which is a component. It's nothing else but a component. It runs 100% in the browser. It's less than 10 lines of HTML. And it's but it requires a marker. That's the caveat. Try to do this jewelry app in where we are using ar.js, but obviously if you need a marker, these like hand tracking is not quite possible yet if you're doing everything in the web.
So Matt, what do you mean by AR components for A-frame?
So ar.js is an add-on component to A-frame. So you load A-frame, and then you've got a bunch of components that are registered with A-frame.
So does it handle like interaction with the camera?
Correct. Yes.
Right.
So you've got zoom in and again. Yeah. Yeah, anyway, you can see it. So you've got a scene again, but now you've got this marker. That's the component. And you want to draw a box, and you've got an entity, a camera entity, which then allows you to position that box onto the camera view of the mobile phone. I'll try and demo that. to do this in the phone, obviously, because oh, we got it. Web AR Playground. There you go. So it asks you if it can use your camera. Oh yeah. And you can mark it. And there you go. You're now drawing the box onto the marker. Now, as you can see, it's not as smooth as the native apps yet. But the crucial thing is, it's from a web page. There you go.
Is that marker just looking for the characters on a sheet of paper?
Yeah, you can have any marker.
Any word at all?
Anything, yeah. It could be a QR code or you just train it.
That's a quick question. Do you know you're running it in the browser there?
Yeah.
So is that using the WebIO playground?
Yeah.
You don't actually deploy that code to sort of a live site somewhere that you're running. That's going to.
No, I've just used their playground site, but effectively it's the same code that I showed you.
So the code that you just showed on the screen is the exact code.
It's exactly the same, yeah.
And so you showed because there's a tiny amount of code on the screen to do that. Where, is there another sort of service worker in the background doing something, or is it literally just that code?
It's that code. It's cool, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah. So where's that sort of image coming from? Is that a 3D image that you've got?
It's a file. Yeah. Well, these are just primitive shapes, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously there's a bit of animation in there now. So my code was without animation. It would just be a box.
Yeah.
But you could still. The crucial thing is it's got tracking of the real world. Right then. Right, so on to WebXR.
Just before you do that, on the previous slide it said requires a
Marker.
Oh, marker. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe that was a typo.
Sorry.
So WebXR is an API for VR and AI. Like I said, it started out as Web VR in 2014. But then, and Web VR was supported as early as 2015. And Facebook brought out a React VR, which is works with Web VR and React together. That's that happened in 2016. 2016, Chrome also supported Web VR, but then Mozilla was looking at AR. It was around about the same time ARKit and AR Core came out, and Mozilla was saying, hang on a minute, we need something like that in the browser. So they proposed a standard for WebXR, and then they started the immersive web working group, which is like, I guess it's you mark that down in your buzzword notebook. It's like Web 2.0 or HTML5 or responsive. I'm guessing you will hear a lot more about immersive web. So browser support for Web AR is pretty good, but it's in beta, so you have to enable it. It's a flag in Chrome, currently in Chrome Canary. And like I said, it's almost ready. So if you go in Chrome, if you've got Chrome Canary, you go there and there. Show you that. So if you just type that in there. You get these guys. I've already enabled it, but these are off by default. So if you want to play around with WebXR, especially WebAR, or the WebXR device API as it's called, you need to enable that. And so hit test is what does the scanning of the surfaces. So if you request a hit test, it basically scans the environment. So that's in preview, where you can enable it. There's all sorts of privacy issues now arising because someone was saying you could effectively have a mobile and scan the whole room without anyone knowing. So there's a whole discussion about privacy around hit tests as well, which is probably going to delay it a little bit. But this is what gives you access to the device sensors tracking the real world, and it allows you to place the 3D models onto the camera view like we've seen before. Oh.
Matt, it's 20 past 9.
Is it? Oh.
When are you planning on finishing?
Sorry, I'll speed up a bit.
Thanks very much.
See, I rattled through the other two talks, and now I'm taking too long. Right. All right, quickly then. Right, so there's other AR frameworks, not just AR.js. There's Argon, AR Toolkit, and all those, X3 DOM. Quickly about 3D models. Now, the recommended file format for A-frame is GITF. Good resources for 3D objects if you want to have a play around is Google Blocks. Sketchfab is a good one. They're ready to go, so you can just download them and they're ready for AR. Software you need for 3D modeling is, I would recommend Blender because it's free. It's pretty good. And so from an e-commerce point of view, obviously you can't just add this to your website. You need your products as 3D models, and you need them pretty realistic. So there's 3 methods of doing that. See ya. One's photogrammetry. Basically, you can. It's the most appealing. You just send in a couple of pictures of your product, and people will create a mesh from that, and then create the textures as well. Still needs a bit of touching up, manual touching up, but that's a good starting point. Then you can invest in a 3D scanner, which is obviously a bit of an outlay. They're quite pricey. They produce larger files as well, and they still need touching up. So it's not like you scan in a ring and you get a perfect 3D model. Or you can get an artist to do it all from scratch, which is the 3D modeling. Remember this app I showed you, Magnolia, the homeware thing. So there's an article on Medium from the people who did that, and they said that they basically created all their homeware from scratch, which is time consuming. But those are the methods. So just quickly wanted to show you Shopify is obviously invested in it. They've gone with the AR, with Apple's AR Quick Look, which is, like I said, all you have to do is drop in a USDZ file, and if you're on an iOS 12 device or higher, that will add the little icon, and then you'll go into mode. I'll show you real quick. There you go. So this is what you get with AR Quick Look, and this is literally just dropping in a USDZ file. So you can hit the AR button. Hopefully it will drop down. So you can see, because it's using the iOS stuff behind the scenes, it's a lot smoother. You can literally, you know, if you were buying a guitar and you just look at the details and stuff like that, it's quite good.
So is this using AppKit or is this still using the
This is Apple's AR Quick Look, which, like I said, it's nothing to do with web. It's not web AR, but if Shopify has got an app called 3D Warehouse, where you can basically link your products. If you have products in Shopify, you link a 3D object to it, and you'll get on your product page, you'll get that little icon. Here, you know that 3D object there on your product page, and you get that.
Can I just run a scenario there? So I've just worked with an engineering firm, so all their stuff is in CAD and Inventor, as you pointed out, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think that they can export to that US, whatever format it is. Is it a case of just adding, so I imagine they've got an online catalogue, is it just a case of adding an attribute to that image, and then an Apple device will say, oh yeah, there's a equivalent AR file for this.
No, you have to you convert it to USDZ files.
So they would convert their entire library to.
Correct. Yeah. There's websites online where you can do that.
So you can have inside your iOS device, you're just on Safari browsing, blah blah blah. Oh, look, I can look at this thing in real life. Click it.
That's right.
You have the full
That's right. Yeah.
experience.
So this is the Shopify admin, and if you go into apps, you'll get this 3D warehouse, and you upload. You can add a 3D model, and you upload the USDZ file, and you link it to a product, and you're up and running in no time, basically. So that it's quite compelling. Right, I'm going to finish off. Almost there. Right, summary. This is what I want to leave you with. AR, what we've learned is a digital layer onto the physical world. The internet, the whole internet is moving from 2D to 3D. It's billion-dollar industries, not too far in the future, even though it looks far in the future. AR in the browser is where it's going to open up the markets. It's not native apps. When it's on all browsers. WebXR is immersive web, and immersive commerce is the industry that's going to come out of it. Thanks for listening and holding on. Right.
Any questions down the bottom?
Yeah.
Can you show the web link again for the presentation?
For the.
Just post it on the internet.
Yeah, I'll post it